of our Greek syntax class, and we are in the Basics of New Testament Syntax by Daniel B. Wallace, and we're starting on page 239 tonight. We've just taken a quiz, vocabulary and principal parts, and a few of the students passed. I see. All right, page 239, the aorist tense. Aspect. All right, $64,000 question. Who can tell me the difference between aspect and Actiensart? Since you're wearing a German shirt tonight, and Actiensart is a German word, maybe you can take a stab at that, Adam.
Should have asked me last week when we were talking about it.
I'll give it a go.
You will?
Yeah.
All right. Then you're wearing, where's your shirt made?
German.
Bangladesh, probably.
Taiwan. Aspect is the basic meaning, not considering any kind of context of how it's being used in a specific example. And Actiensart takes its context and it's affected by things around it, and that's the meaning after.
Well done. Well done. Did you hear that?
No.
Aspect is the basic theoretical meaning of the tense itself. Actiensart is that tense in a particular usage in a context interacting with things like lexicography and context and those sorts of things that might push the tense one way or another from within its range of usage, but off of the central definition of it, which would be the aspect. So when you talk about aorist and its aspect, the word snapshot is a good one. The present and imperfect tenses you can think of as a movie shot, a video. The aorist and the future, by the way, you can think of as a snapshot, a camera. Of course, these days, a digital camera, just taking a still picture. Remember, he talked about the durative or progressive tenses being an internal view of the action. You might say an up-close view. Remember the illustration of the parade? You're on the curb watching the parade. The aorist is an external view of the action where you see the whole all at once. Maybe from a blimp you're looking at the parade. And so that's how he describes these things. So the aorist tense presents an occurrence in summary viewed as a whole from the outside without regard for the internal makeup of the occurrence. This contrasts with the present and the imperfect, which portrays the action as an ongoing process. It may be helpful to think of the aorist as taking a snapshot of the action, while the imperfect, like the present, takes a motion picture portraying the action as it unfolds. So in the indicative mood, the aorist indicates past tense. In the participle, the aorist indicates action before or antecedent to the participle, or I'm sorry, to the main verb. Aorist participle is action before the main verb, antecedent to the main verb. An aorist in the imperative, an aorist in the subjunctive, for example, would indicate future event or possible future event, really, right? Events that haven't happened yet. We understand that because we talked about mood, right? Because those are potential moods. Oblique moods, you might say. All right? And I'm glad to see that he, with the participles, the present and aorist participle and future participle, sees there to be an actual significance of time in relation to the main verb. So in the indicative, the time is absolute. In other words, it's how the writing is presenting the time from the perspective of the writer, past, present, and future. It's a relative time in a participle relating to the action of the main verb. Some nowadays want to deny that the participle has that kind of time significance in relation to the main verb, because sometimes you see participles in those tenses not operating in that way. And that's just the exception that proves the rule in my view, and in his view too. So I think that's right. And we already know that there are reasons for, moods or tenses or whatever to be pushed off of what you might say is normal by context, right? Or maybe not normal so much as typical. Probably normal too, right? All right, so next page, thawing out the aorist, the role of context and lexeme, context and the meaning of the word that is in the aorist tense. Second paragraph, by contrast, if a speaker wants to speak of the unchanging nature of a state such as I have or I live, the aorist is not normally appropriate. Indeed, when the aorist of such stative verbs is used, the emphasis is most frequently on the entrance into the state. And you'll see a usage of the aorist, the ingressive aorist. So if you have a stative verb in the aorist, then it's likely to be an ingressive aorist. There's a little clue to you in identifying the aorist. The point is that often the choice of tense is made for a speaker by the action he or she is describing. At times, the tense chosen by the speaker is the only one that could have been used to portray the idea. Three major factors determine this: lexical meaning of the verb, contextual factors, and other grammatical features. This is the difference between aspect and Atkinsart, right? Aspect is the basic meaning of the tense, unaffected by considerations in a given utterance, while Atkinsart is the meaning of the tense as used by an author in a particular utterance, affected, as it were, by other features of the language. The use of the aorist in any given situation depends then on its combination with other linguistic features. Then he talks about the abused aorist. Remember that we had some abused case usages too, didn't we? And he talks about saying too little and saying too much. And so you've read that, but if you assume that nothing more than the unaffected meaning can ever be seen when the aorist is used, now you're saying too little. In other words, the aorist is always simply just, the most simple kind of presentation of an action, and that's it. Denying that there are different uses for the aorist. One aorist error, as it's been called, is to say that the aorist tense means once for all. And it doesn't necessarily mean once for all. Context can push it in that way. In the book of Hebrews, you have the word hapos used, which means what? Once for all. So when it says Jesus died once for all, it uses hapos, and so it is once for all. But the aorist in and of itself, apart from context, does not mean that. And so don't make that error with regard to the aorist. All right, specific uses. The constative aorist views the action as a whole. He says the event might be iterative in nature, and I'm looking at the second paragraph under that. The event might be iterative in nature, or durative, or momentary, but the aorist says none of this. You understand the difference? This is what we're saying about it. This is how we're presenting the action, not necessarily the reality of the action that happened. See, it places the stress on the fact of the occurrence, not its nature. So the constative aorist is really your basic run-of-the-mill aorist that's pretty close to the basic aspect of aorist in general. You know what I'm saying? It's pretty close to the aorist aspect theoretically. Then you have the ingressive aorist, which indicates the beginning or entry into an action. Two blind men followed him. Well, again, they began to follow him because of what the context is indicating. Now the king became angry. The king was angered, because of the context. They're pushing for the entrance into that state. Well, and again, anger is a state, isn't it? Remember what he said? When you have an aorist of a stative verb, then it's usually going to be ingressive. You entered into that. Then you have just the opposite, the consummative aorist, which indicates the end of a process. The little girl has not died, so the idea of to die in the aorist, it's kind of a finalized sort of thing. It's something that's happened, talking about the end result of something. The lion from the tribe of Judah overcame. Well, if you overcome, then that's kind of indicating the consummation of something. You have the epistolary aorist. This is similar to what you see in journalism, right? If I'm writing a story today about something that's going to happen tomorrow, and it will appear the next day in the newspaper, I have to write about that story in the past tense. I can't say the governor will give a speech at the Rotary Club. I have to say the governor gave a speech at the Rotary Club. See? Well, an epistolary aorist is a little bit like that. In New Testament letters, the author self-consciously describes the letter from the time frame of the audience. So like, I wrote to you, right? Even though he's still writing in the present tense when he's writing, when they're reading it, the writing will be in the past tense. The proleptic aorist describes something future, and it is indicating that something in the future is so certain that we're talking about it as if it were past. Paul says, those whom he justified, these he glorified. These he also glorified. And glorified hasn't happened yet. The glorification hasn't happened yet, but it's so certain that he uses the aorist tense. He puts it in that past tense sort of frame of reference. All right, the immediate past or dramatic aorist, a couple of examples of that. The immediate past, a certain ruler came and bowed down before him saying, my daughter has died. Well, obviously her has just now died. If it would have been a year ago, he probably wouldn't have been approaching Jesus. And the dramatic aorist, behold, just now you heard this blasphemy. Behold, now you heard the blasphemy. And it just happened, right? And there's drama in that. There's excitement in that. All right, so those are the uses of the aorist. That's fairly simple, isn't it? All right, next page. Remember that the future tense has the same aspect as the aorist tense. And it makes sense because if the action is future, it really is an undefined action, isn't it? So, now you might want to say something will happen in the future, but you might want to express that it will be a durative action. Right? There are ways to do that, and we'll see one in our text tonight. But anyway, first paragraph, with reference to aspect, the future seems to offer an external portrayal, something of a temporal counterpart to the aorist indicative. So it's like the aorist, only it's in the future. All right, so you have the predictive future, which again is pretty close to the pure aspect of the future coming through your run-of-the-mill future, the predictive future. Something will happen. Then you have the imperatival future, similar to you will clean your room. So a command in the future. The deliberative future. Deliberative indicates that it's in a question, right? Should we buy 200 denarii worth of food and give it to them to eat? That's in the future tense. How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? How will we escape? So that's how you form, or one way to form a question with the future tense. So that's the uses of the future. Fairly simple. Now we have the perfect and pluperfect tenses. Really, the perfect tense and the pluperfect tense really combine the two. There is an action which is expressed as if it were in the aorist tense. So from an external perspective, there is a result which is expressed as if in the present for the perfect or imperfect for the pluperfect, right? And that's from an internal perspective. So you have an action, we're just saying something happened, and we're saying it in a way that says it's a kind of an undefined action, aoristic kind of action. Something happened, and the results continue on. With the perfect, the results continue on up to the present. How long they will continue is not expressed. It's just right now the results remain. The pluperfect, you just take that whole perfect thing and put it in the past. Something happened in the past, and in the past the results continued on. Now the results may still be continuing in the present, but we're not saying that. So in English, I have read this book. Or for the pluperfect, well, let's use a different one. I can use the same one. I have eaten dinner tonight, which means I ate and I'm still full. Yesterday, I could say, well, somebody came over to my house with a pizza yesterday evening, and I had already eaten dinner. You see. So then I ate dinner before the pizza came, and by the time the pizza got there, I was still full. See what I mean? All right. It says the perfect tense is probably the most important exegetically of all the Greek tenses, and it's used less than the others. At least less than the present, aorist, future, and imperfect. Certainly not less than the pluperfect. That's very rare in the New Testament, elsewhere as well. So the author is choosing this deliberately, and so that makes it all the more exegetically significant. On page 247, there you can see the chart like the ones he's been giving. That second paragraph. The uses of the perfect tense may be broken down into three main groups: normative, collapsed, and specialized. The normative uses involve both the external and internal aspects, but with a slightly different emphasis. The collapsed perfects are those that collapse or suppress either the internal or the external aspect, that is, either the action itself or the result, because of the contextual or lexical interference, respectively. The specialized perfects are rare uses that deter from the normal usage in a more pronounced way than the collapsed perfects do. So here we have the first one, the intensive perfect. The intensive perfect is used to emphasize the results or present state produced by the past action. So the intensive perfect indicates or emphasizes the results. So an example would be, man, your sins are forgiven. So the state of forgiveness is the important thing there, right? Or as you see oftentimes, you get graptai with quotations of Scripture, just as it is written. You could even translate that just as it stands written. It was written and it remains established today. The validity of that utterance.
We translated a lot of those that were translated. It has been written. It has been written.
Right. It has been written. But remember that we're emphasizing here the result of the writing, not the writing itself. The important thing here is not so much the act of the original writing, but the fact that it stands accepted, validated. It is God's word forever, existing in heaven, kind of a thing.
So that would be a good example of the difference between these two, extensive and intensive.
Mm-hmm. Yep. An extensive would emphasize the completion of a past act or process or whatever. So again, you have the two parts of the present, the act and the result. The intensive emphasizes the result. The extensive emphasizes the act. Second example from Romans 5:5, the love of God has been poured out in our hearts. And so he is indicating that he would say that the act of God's love being poured out is what's being emphasized at that point. Not that it's still out of the container, as it were, but that it was poured out. You have an aoristic perfect, sometimes called a dramatic or historical perfect. The perfect indicative is rarely used in a rhetorical manner to describe an event in a highly vivid way. The aorist dramatic perfect is, aoristic dramatic perfect is used as a simple past tense without concern for present consequences. In this respect, it shares a kinship with the historical present. This use is informed by contextual intrusions or narrative. The key to detecting a dramatic perfect is the absence of any notion of existing results. So, this Moses God sent. That's a perfect tense, but he's translating it as just as if it were an aorist, basically. Then you have the opposite, really, perfect with a present force, and we've seen various words that lend themselves to this or require this, like oida. Oida is the most commonly used verb in this category, it says, but other verbs also seem to be used in this way, such as the prefix esteka, tepoitha, and memnemai. He says in these stated verbs, there's little distinction between the act and the result. Right? The result of knowing is knowing. When one comes to stand, he stands. When the result of persuading someone is that he's still persuaded. That kind of a thing. All right, so that's the perfect tense. And the pluperfect tense is similar. Like we said, it just takes the perfect, puts it all in the past. You have the intensive perfect, which emphasizes the result. You have the extensive perfect, which emphasizes the original action. Then you have a pluperfect with a simple past force. This is like the perfect with a present force. So we have a pluperfect with a simple past force. He would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. All the angels stood around the throne. All right, and that takes us to the end of our section, because we're going to get into the infinitive next time. And so we'll save that. All right, so we've covered all the tenses. Probably the things that you will pay attention to the most, just on a run-of-the-mill kind of basis, as you're doing your exegesis, are case usages and tense usages. You need to know the other stuff too, because all that matters. But tense usages and case usages are probably what you'll pay most attention to. All right. It's already 7 o'clock. We've been at it for an hour, but the tape hasn't been on for an hour.